I just found out a brand new Google Ads scaling strategy that's responsible for scaling this DIY arts and crafts e-commerce brand to roughly $216,000 per month in revenue. And in this video, I want to break it all down for you step by step so you can do the same for your own e-commerce brand. Now, this is a brand under my Google Ads agency or marketing, which we roughly started working with on September 11th. So everything from after September 11th essentially is what we did. And if we go back to their Shopify store, look at the trajectory since September 11th, September 12th, we can see that this brand is quite on a scaling spree. I mean, if we just take a look at what was happening before September 11th and look at all the way until yesterday, which I'm recording this video on November 5th, we can see there has been a 64% increase in the total revenue. Now, because it is a DIY arts and crafts store, there is going to be a big influence come Q4 for this brand, so it is expected that the sales do increase. However, the strategies that we have been implementing in the back end, from the Google Ads side to the Meta Ad side to even the CRO techniques that the brand is implementing, all of it is accumulating to give this sort of exponential curve and exponential growth which this brand is achieving. And this is actually a very interesting exponential curve, because if we look at this time period and then we compare it to maybe last year during this time period, so let's just for example change it to 2024 and see how things were during this time, we can see that last year during this exact same time they did roughly $46,000 in revenue, and come 2025, it's a completely different trajectory. Why is this brand growing to this level at this pace? Well, there's a variety of different things which are influencing this brand's growth, almost a 5 to 6x growth. But on the Google Ads side, the trajectory has been fairly simple and the approach has been just as simple. Now, a little bit background on this brand. One of the major goals which we started working with this brand with on the Google Ads side at least was to stop its reliance on just organic traffic and have a more sustainable marketing platform that doesn't feel just like another roller coaster like Meta Ads. Because for the entirety of this brand's basically existence in the last 365 days, there were two things this brand was heavily reliant on. Number one, it was reliant on organic traffic, and number two, it was reliant on Meta Ads. And the main issue during this time was Meta Ads, of course, is a big roller coaster where you can have a very solid month from going from 187K to 471K and then dropping all the way back down to 1/3 of the sales. And this was something this brand owner wanted to kind of deviate away from, because this meant there was a lack of consistency with the revenue, there was a lack of profitability over the long period of time, which they just did not want to deal with anymore. So what we did is we got to work after working through their initial things, like the original approach we took on the Google Ads side of things, at least very similar to a lot of the brands we work with. We start from the ground up, the foundation up, which in this situation, the foundation actually, despite having been running on Google Ads for quite some time, needed a bit of work. And in this situation, one of the major things was their overall product feel and their overall product approach. Now, it doesn't matter what niche or industry your brand is in, your product feed is literally everything. It determines 70 to 80% of your success. And what that means is the moment you blend in with your competition is the moment you start to lose within Google Ads. And that's essentially what was happening for a long period of time for this brand. I mean, they were running ads for quite some time with their campaigns, with their different strategies, but the main issue that they always faced was their overall returns after Q4 were abysmal. They were very low, and this was simply happening because the algorithm was only kind of optimizing for the heavy window shoppers, the heavy promo shoppers essentially, who only waited for a promotion before they started shopping. And this was partly due to the fact that their product images were just like their competition. When you simple search for one of their products, for example, I'm going to do a search for a different keyword that this brand does not sell just for the sake of security reasons, but this is a very similar thing that was happening with this brand, where all of the products essentially were the same exact style, and as a result, this brand, although it was ranking in the front, it was blending in. So even though they were ranking in the fronts by bidding high, by spending more money than everybody else, the profit was just not following, leaving them in a very bad situation. So the very first thing we did was create a completely separate product image strategy, product title strategy that, number one, allowed us to be the opposite of the competition. Number two, allowed us to do what the algorithm wanted us to do. So for instance, majority of the competitors had very big product titles. We were taking the opposite approach and making ours much shorter, sweeter, and to the point. Why? Because not only did this allow us to stand out from competition, but it allowed us to have our ads be more visible to our audience. Because when everything is blending in, the moment you start to do something different is the moment people start to notice your ad more. And this was causing the CTRs to go up, which obviously the algorithm wanted more of. But all of these product feed related changes and whatnot led us to the scaling phases, which eventually got the brand scaling to the levels it's at this point of time, which in the last 30 days, if we just compare it to the previous 30 days on the Google Ads side, we can see overall ad spend is up 57%, as it says right here. Conversion value is up 62%, and the ROAS is up 3%. It's almost at a 4x ROAS at this point of time. Now, there's three major scaling phases we took this brand to, which is the ultimate scaling strategy for you to implement as well. The first phase was the efficiency phase. Now, with this brand, because it had been running ads for a very long time, essentially since 2024, there was a lot of momentum within this brand. There was a lot of things going on, and because of that, there was a lot of noise in the overall campaign strategies and whatnot. So for instance, if we go back to before we actually began work, from August 13th essentially to maybe September 10th, we can see the number of campaigns that were running in this account, which were roughly 7 different campaigns. Now, first of all, this brand did not have a very high budget to begin with during this time. If we change it to the daily time period, we can see it was barely spending $200 to $300 per day in total ad spend. But second, the number of SKUs that this brand had essentially made it so that we needed to take more of a consolidated approach versus just a segregated approach, especially when it comes to campaign types like search campaigns. So they had only 2 major performance max campaigns running at that point of time, focused on shopping placements, and the rest was just search-based approach, which again, for this brand and this industry was not ideal from what we saw. So what we wanted to do first, the first phase, was efficiency. We wanted to make sure, number one, this brand was not wasting its budget on irrelevant traffic, but number two, it was also ranking for the right keywords. So the first thing we did is we actually excluded a lot of the different placements in terms of content suitability settings to make sure that it does not rank for random things. Because the first thing I noticed was when I went over to the reports to check the Performance Max campaigns placements during this time, I noticed that out of the 98,000 total impressions that the Performance Max campaigns got during this time period, only 73,000 actually went to Google owned and operated. The rest went towards random pages and random apps like the mobile app iFunny, or ebay.com, or express.co.uk, or mirror.co.uk. Now, these might seem on a surface level ideal placements, but the thing is about these placements, they're very low buying intense placements. So if you don't add in proper settings for placement exclusions, end up wasting a large amount of your budget on these display networks, which you never want to do, because Google owned and operated placements is where majority of your sales, 95% even, would happen. And it just doesn't make sense to spend more of your budget on those potential 1% to 5% extra revenue when there's a good chance it won't even be at that level. So that's the first thing we did, getting rid of any types of bad placements. Then it was all about going inside the insight section to look at all converting keywords. The first thing we always try to understand during this phase is, are we relying on branded traffic on a great scale or not? Because if there's a lot of branded traffic influence, the first thing we want to do is drive the brand away from branded traffic. And during that time, what we noticed was a lot of the sales were actually coming from branded sales, and we wanted to kind of get the brand away from this. So what we did is we started adding brand exclusions to a lot of the campaigns running. First of all, we made things a bit more efficient by getting rid of all of the underperformers, because we wanted more of a consolidated approach. So this first PMX ended up getting shut off, this search campaign here ended up getting shut off, and we made more of a consolidated approach where the budgets could be honed in on a select few campaigns, and these campaigns had brand keywords excluded completely from them, because that's the only way to make things efficient, to have a branded versus non-branded approach that's separate from each other. The final major thing we did for the efficiency stage was understand that this brand did not want to operate at a 3.3x ROAS at this level of ad spend, because the lower their ad spend, the less profitable they were overall. So what they either wanted to do was either increase the ROAS at this low level of ad spend per month, or they wanted to increase their ad spend but then be fine with the lower ROI. So what we did is, in order to add efficiency, after getting rid of any underperforming campaigns, we actually increased restrictions on a lot of these campaigns. We went from a certain target ROAS restriction and increased it by 10 to 20% every 7 to 14 days when we initially started, because the main goal here was to start increasing the overall profitability that this brand was facing. And during the initial time period, it was a bit of a struggle because these campaigns were optimized for a lower converting audience type. The ROAS restriction that they were initially working with, it was just not designed to convert at a higher ROAS restriction, and as a result, they were not getting the high quality traffic in at the very start compared to what they could have been going after. But over time, as we started to run more of these ROAS restrictions and just let the campaigns optimize without touching too much, without changing too much things, it started to optimize, and the revenue during the end portion of basically the time period, early October, actually started to increase, while the conversion value became a bit more steady. I mean, if we look at the overall ROAS for this time period, it started to go around a 5.7x ROAS and started to hold steady at around a 4x ROAS, which is exactly what we wanted. So after noticing the stability with the ROAS and the improvement, we went onto phase 2, which for this brand was horizontal scaling, which, by the way, a lot of the brands we work with in my agency, which if you run a brand making over $50,000 per month in revenue, you need some extra help scaling to the next level with Google Ads, go onto my website at yourmarketing.com, schedule a completely free call with me, and let's see how we can potentially work together and make that happen. But a lot of the brands we work with, we always start with horizontal scaling first, because we want to add more audience sizes to what is already working. So in this situation, horizontal scaling essentially meant adding asset groups to the main Performance Max campaign, which was now running. This last one was eventually started later on for European countries only, but this first one, we essentially wanted to focus more on the asset group strategy side of things. So in the start, initially, we had an A/B test going on where it was an asset groups approach versus a feed-only approach. But what we noticed is that the feed-only approach ended up being a lot better, so we eventually just let that one run and pause the other one completely. But horizontal scaling is all about expanding within running campaigns. You don't want to add more campaigns necessarily for horizontal scale. Rather, you can do things such as add in ad copies for search ads, or add in asset groups for Performance Max campaigns, or maybe adding different video creatives if it's a YouTube campaign. That enables horizontal scaling, because now that increases the audience size that you're going after, because now you're hitting different pockets of the big audience size, so to speak, which is ultimately what you want. But in addition to further adding the audience size, we started adding in search themes, because this allowed the algorithm to now go after certain interests, so to speak, that we knew were very relevant to this brand. And of course, it's something that we had found through the insight section. This is why it's so crucial to go through phase 1, because the insight section literally gives you hidden gems of what kind of audience is converting, what isn't converting, and from there you can add in search themes, signals, so on and so forth. But in addition, during this phase, we actually started to decrease ROAS restrictions and bidding restrictions that we had initially in place, because horizontal scaling is all about increasing the audience size. And when you decrease the ROAS restrictions or target CPA restrictions, what happens is now you enable the campaign to go after a bigger audience pool, which means it's now going to go after maybe 100 people instead of the 50 people they were going after that would have converted at that very high target ROAS restriction. So anytime you want to scale the audience size, just keep in mind you need to be lowering your ROAS restrictions or your target CPA restrictions, because that increases the pool of the audience size. So we did this every 7 to 14 days in this situation, and we did it very slowly because, again, we did not want to sacrifice the overall quality of the audience we were targeting and keep things still steady during this time. So if we look at the entirety of October, for all of the campaigns, we can see that initially this started off to really kick the campaigns in the right kind of approach. So costs went up 53% just in October compared to the previous period, and revenue went up while the ROAS also went up, which is exactly what we wanted to go after. But finally, to close in the phase number 2 and to move on to phase number 3, we started adding in more of these search campaigns. So here we have a branded search campaign running, which has been running since the beginning of time. But essentially, we edited these other different search campaigns that we had running by adding in more keywords which were more appropriate based on the insight section. Again, exact match and phrase match is what we want to go after, and we improved the ad copies, which can be clearly visible with the increase in the ROAS for the time period. So ROAS was actually starting to improve, and the brand was becoming a lot more profitable because not only were we going after the right keywords that were high buying intent, but we were approaching this audience with the words and the sentences they wanted to see, which allowed us then to move on to the final phase of scaling, which was vertical scaling. It's the easiest phase, but most brand owners, they basically go into this phase first and disregard everything else. This is the skip phase where you increase budget. So for the last 30 or so days, last 14 days, all we have been focused on doing is trying to spend as much money as possible at an increased rate. So we went at the very start of the 14-day period, October 22, we went for spending $340. So now going up to $750. So all about vertical scaling, because we went through phase 1, we added efficiency. We went through phase 2, we added horizontal scale to increase the audience size. And now finally we closed the loop by going into phase 3, vertical scaling, because now that the audience size has increased, we actually can spend more money and the campaigns will not be limited by budget anymore. They actually have room to scale, which is exactly the ultimate goal. Now, it's all about using this data that's coming in. You're looking into the insight section to further understand what are the good keywords, what are the good audiences, what is not working, and from there, just optimizing the back end. So to scale long term with this brand on Google Ads, at least, all we're doing is essentially going in and increasing the budgets while improving the back end, the foundations, the product feed with proper title optimization, descriptions, and even, of course, CRO. So one great thing that this brand did is they started investing in a CRO company, which started helping them improve their landing page. So the conversion rates, if we go onto their Shopify dashboard, have actually increased in the last 90 days or so, which is essentially very helpful for the brand. I mean, if we look right here, there has been steady periods of time where the conversion rates were around 1%. Some periods before, it used to be around 1.66, but now it's been consistently on an increase, and that's because the websites and the landing pages is improving as we improve the foundations. Because keep in mind, landing page experience is one of the crucial parts, what determines your quality score for your Google Ads account, and ultimately what determines how well your ads perform. And with landing pages, it's all about having a simplistic approach what your audience wants to see. In this manner, as we can see, it's all based around a certain color with certain kinds of variations that are very clear, very easy to understand. And any type of question the user may have within your niche or industry should be answered on the landing page. That's essentially the main strategy we recommended to this brand owner, which they implemented. So everything from shipping to the specific types of material the product uses to what the user gets, and if there's any types of variation such as customization, or if there's anything else included that's an addition, all these things are very clearly visible above the fold for the brand and the landing pages, which is ultimately what allows the conversion rate for this brand to continue to increase. But very simple approach in terms of scaling. Again, taking the brand through phases is where your brand will truly scale. If you run a brand doing $50,000 or more per month in revenue, you need some extra help scaling to the next level with Google Ads, go onto my website at yourmarketing.com, schedule a completely free call with me, and let's see how we can potentially work together and make that happen.